we appeal to athletes who have ambitions of playing like high level college sports. I talk about culture. A lot of culture depends on your coach's ability to interact and build relationships with the families and the athletes. In the strength and conditioning world, like, we're alpha men, right? That's just the way it is. That's the way we're wired. Like, we want people to come in our gym and think like, hey, there's Mick.
My training's the best. I know how to do it the best.
Absolutely.
Hello and welcome to Gym World Worldwide. I am your host this week and every week, John Franklin, and I am joined by my co-host, who's also here basically every week, Mateo Lopez. And with us this week is a very special guest. We're going to be talking about how to make your first $1 million as a male model. Welcome to the show, Mick Bruckner. How are you doing?
Doing great. Appreciate you having me on today.
So, when you're not being a male model and stripping, you run a place called Annex Sports in New Jersey. Tell us what that is.
So the Annex Sports Performance Center is predominantly athletes driven. We do some adult fitness, but we started and have always focused on the athletic population from the amateur to professional level.
And you've been at it for a little while, right?
Yeah, I started it in October of 2006.
And it's primarily baseball is your background, right? Like, how do you position yourself? Are you the baseball gym? Are you the sports gym? Like, what are you?
I mean, I think we're definitely known in our area to work with, the overhead throwing baseball population. We continue to, reach other field sport athletes, both on the male and female side of competitive sports. But I would say like have always kind of built our business on that niche of the baseball, overhead throwing athlete population.
And was that your background?
Yes. Yeah. I had, goals and ambitions as a high school athlete to play professional baseball. I was certainly on that track. And then in college, I had 2 elbow surgeries that kind of stopped my progression towards that. And then my next biggest passion was training. I love training. It was something that was a big part of my life as early as like age 15. And so when I realized at the point of after my second elbow surgery that baseball was likely not in my future, I kind of shift all that focus in terms of becoming an athlete to more of like a strength coach. So I did internships, mentorships. At the time I was living in Arizona. I was attending Arizona State. And so I worked at a lot of facilities out there that specialized in delivering really good training to baseball athletes. And, I knew that this particular type of model didn't exist back where I grew up in New Jersey. So I came back in October of 2006 and then started the Annex. So
look at this place. This is a pretty badass looking gym.
Oh, wow.
You got a big turf down the center. Those garage doors, like, do they open to another space there?
No, that's just outside.
Oh, that opens so they're literal garage doors. So how much space is this? It looks pretty big.
So all in, it's it's like 13,900 square feet.
Jesus.
Whoa. That's a behemoth.
That is a lot of space.
Whoa.
Yes.
And was it always like this, or did you start pretty small?
So we started in the basement of an office complex. We had like normal, like drop ceilings, squat racks, some cables, a treadmill. That was probably about 800 square feet. And that was me and one other coach. And we, by 2008, we had quickly outgrown that facility. And we moved into our second space that was just under 5,000 square feet. We brought in more coaches and business started to grow there. And then in 2014, we moved into the space that we're looking at now. So,
and what kind of numbers are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Pardon?
What kind of numbers are you guys doing? Like, how many members do you work with? What's the top line look like?
Yeah, it fluctuates from the standpoint of like in our busiest time of the year, we're, 350 athletes. And that's a mixture of like 80% athletes, maybe 20% general fitness. In our slower months, which we're in right now, because of the population we work with, it drops down a bit. So we'll drop down to about like 275 members. But But from the standpoint of like yearly revenue, like we've seen year over year growth, and like we're just under 1.1 million for top line. So
Awesome.
And is this mostly one semi-private or a mixture of all? May have missed it. Large group.
So our athletes are all semi-private. So essentially their entry point is through a paid assessment, and then they go right into training. So there's no like LBOs with the athletes. We've never ever really done that. It's always been through an assessment. Our adult fitness is a little bit different. We do like a 14-day free trial, and our adult fitness director, Matt, he does a really good job of he's slowly building that population up. And it was something that like, it was a large group model. Now it's transitioning more towards, small group and semi-private, simply because it's tough to really plan and build a year-long training program with the adults, because through the months of October, like September through essentially the school year, right? Our evenings are crazy busy. Like we're packed. So we can't really put something on the schedule at the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock hour when we've got 40 to 50 athletes in the gym. So we've really just kind of focused a lot of our adult fitness towards the mornings. And so that's where like we've kind of gone away with large groups. We still offer, I think, 2 offerings a day for large group like training. But for the most part, what he's trying to do is more on the semi-private small group. So
300 is a lot of members, but what did you say? 18,000 square feet? Or
14.
14? That seems like a lot of space still for that amount of members. How is the space like laid out and utilized?
Yeah, unfortunately, when you're working with athletes, like what makes our space pretty unique is that we have the ability to run like 40 yards and have enough space for them to slow down. And it's clear sight lines and clear span. Like it's really tough to find those locations. And in order for us to be able to sprint our field sport athletes, like we need a lot of space. So in a perfect world, I'd love to have less. And, we're in the process of, we're coming up on the end of our lease term here in our current location. And in kind of looking at the way the business has evolved and where our trajectory is going, like, I feel like with each space, there's more iterations and we find better ways and more efficient ways to, manage the flow and the volume of athletes. I definitely think we could take less space in a perfect world and maybe be more efficient with, how much we have for office and showers and stuff like that. I would say out of our space here, we have about maybe 10 to 11,000 square feet of like usable training space. The rest we have like locker rooms, and we have an on-site like PT clinic that rents space from us, and they occupy about 1,000 square feet. And so I think we could definitely be more efficient with, I think we could get away with 12,000 square feet and still have, 11,000 square feet of training space and just be more efficient. And that's kind of like how we're evolving into our next location, is something that I've been really trying to like fine tune those numbers and, rather than having a really high rent, like if we can drop that down, it'll just boost our profitability. So.
But to your point, if you are going to do this niche, right, where you're dealing with field athletes and sprinters and runners, like you will need space to run. So at a certain point, that just might be the cost of wanting to service that niche. But yeah, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
And what kind of staff do you have to run this with this many members? Sounds like it's not like a one person operation.
No. So we have, aside from I don't do as much coaching as I used to. I have one other business partner he's not so much an operator. He's more like a coach. And then we have 4 other coaches on staff that are full-time. And then we have like one part-time coach that just helps with the adult fitness classes. So all in, that's, and then the only other person who's a non-support staff for training is we have an admin who's, works like remotely 2 days a week and then is in facility 3 days a week. So
how many full-time is that? 3, 2?
No, it's myself, 2. And then we have, so I think it's 7 full-time right now.
What I missed. So everyone is full-time almost.
Yeah. Our adult fitness, he's compensated a little bit differently. Every one of our like sports performance coaches are all on salary. And then the only person who's paid on like a commission basis is our adult fitness, because it's a population and a part of our revenue stream that we're gradually building. So I wanted to create an opportunity for him to, be incentivized to build a program from, I wouldn't say from scratch, but continue to grow it. Whereas our sports performance is already pretty established. It's, consistent cash flow. It's a solid machine at this point. So
all salary, that's pretty rare for sports performance, right? Like that seems unusual. Why'd you go that route?
So for me, we used to do it, paid on an hourly / like commission basis. And we kind of restructured it a couple of years ago, probably about 5 years ago, simply because like I felt in order for myself, I was working like 80 hours a week, 8 of those hours a day would be training on the floor athletes. I'd come in early and train all the adults, and I'd work with pro athletes after that. Then I would have a break. Then I would train high school athletes from 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Right. And it just wasn't sustainable. And then in between, I had to do all the, running the facility too. So I was wearing a ton of hats. And I quickly realized that if we didn't restructure the way coaches were compensated or people were compensated, like I was never going to get out of that. I was a slave to the business. So for me, I kind of reverse engineered like what was most important to me. And that was finding better balance. I had kids at the time and, they were getting older and I wanted to be more present. So I realized if I could create a system where we knew we had coaches on the floor, regardless of whether or not, we shifted from like, hey, you had your book of athletes that you would manage scheduling, training, programming, all that stuff. Now it's like, all right, we have some head coaches who do the assessments and the programming. And then we have some entry level coaches who are there just to, carry out some of the coaching. It would allow us to create a little bit more balance with like the scheduling and the coaching staff. And I knew I could always depend on having people at least 7 days a week, because with athletes from a off season to an in season standpoint, we like, in order for us to charge like a weekly membership or like a monthly membership, I wanted to make sure we had somebody there at all times. So it was just kind of the way we did it in a way such that I could structure more balance and more consistency with offering the training 7 days a week. And that was the goal. And it was something that over time I think early on it was an adjustment. But as our revenue is pretty consistent throughout the year, like kind of know where, there's some months that will be profitable. And then there's some months that like we're pretty close to being, even. And that's just the nature of where we are. And so I was comfortable enough to know where the trends of our revenue streams were and where it was from month to month, that I'm like, all right, here's what I can offer from a salary. And then it was just a little bit more consistency and continuity for the coaches as well, rather than, they'd have busy months where they would make a ton of money off of, their hourly / commission. And then there was months where like like this time of year where it'd be super slow and they just, I wanted it to be more stable for them too. So.
And so we didn't talk about it, but you mentioned you do your adult stuff slightly different than you do your athlete stuff. How are you packaging and pricing?
So, we have our large group stuff that it's around $200 a month, or we bill on a 4-week cycle. Whereas our athletes, it's all semi-private. So like our lowest price point is for 2 days a week. It's about $500 every 4 weeks. Most of our amateur athletes are training anywhere between 2 to 3 days a week. We offer an in-season rate, which is really once a week, but we don't offer it as once a week because we like if an athlete wants to train off season, we don't really do once a week training packages. So we'll do that for an in season if an athlete is continually training all year round, but we don't advertise it as like a once a week package. But from the standpoint of like the semi-private for the adults it is a similar price point, right? Like it's roughly around like 60 to $65 a session if you were to break it down. And so that's kind of how we structure the cost.
How'd you make it this long? 2006 is a long time. And you're in a competitive market like New Jersey. All the best gyms in the world seem to be in New Jersey. So I guess how did your, you said you've moved to kind of the semi-private model more so recently. So how else has the business evolved since like 2006 to now?
So from a model standpoint, our sports performance has always been semi-private since day one. It's always been, like I said, a paid assessment and then into training. Um, the evolution has come more on the adult fitness side, where like we did large group. Then, I think it's just in order for us to create consistency, and then the population that we were serving, we just found, and part of it is because like that's what my adult fitness director, that's what he envisions, and I don't like I'm fully supportive of where he wants to take it. And that's kind of where he wants to see the evolution going from just an overall structural standpoint. So that's kind of how we've evolved it. But overall, from the sports performance side, we haven't changed at all.
But but you do, like, what is a pay, like, for someone who's unfamiliar with your model, explain
Yep.
like, what does a paid assessment cost? What do you get? Like, how do you sell this? If you're just like a gen pop gym and you hear all these $1 million gym owners we're bringing on in sports performance, explain how that all works. And would you recommend that? Or would you say run away as quickly as you can from sports performance? Because
you gotta be able to take punches from the standpoint of being a sports performance facility. You gotta know that like it's like riding, like keep your highs, like your highs low and your lows high. Like for me, like there's really great months and then there's challenging months. The way I look at it now is when we first started, it was feast or famine. Like we would crush it on our busy months and then it would be just dead in our slow months. And I think what's allowed us to have when we talk about the salaries and all that stuff, I think what's allowed us to continually grow and increase our, top line revenue is that our slow months are not as slow anymore, right? Like, for example, like on our best month, we'll do like 130K, right? Like that's our really good month in like the winter months where we have pro athletes, college athletes, high school athletes. So we're hitting all three of our target demographics. But then in our slower months, we'll be like 50 grand less than that, right? So I think that used to be a much bigger gap from the standpoint of revenue. Now we're just slowly bringing up those slower months. So I think that's something that we've worked really hard in terms of like prioritizing the importance of in-season training, the messaging that we're talking about, through the assessment process. Like, hey, this isn't like just an off-season training program. We train athletes all year round, right? That's like, if you want to really get to where you want to go. And I think that's the caveat is what, like we appeal to athletes who have ambitions of playing like high-level college sports. So when we kind of create the language and the culture such that like we're creating long-term development, and and the only way to do that is to train year round. Now we've started to combat those issues of, well, like people just used to train, all right, we're off season. I'll come and see you when my season's over. And then as soon as I'm in season, you won't see me for another 4 months. So we've done a much better job of messaging and creating that culture around development with the athletes. And I think it's really served, from a revenue standpoint really well. Like this month, like April was our best April we've ever had, simply because the 6 months previous to that, all the messaging, all the email marketing, all the stuff we've been doing was like, hey, this is our culture. And so people were just bought in, and it's made a big difference. So
that was kind of what I meant by my previous question. Like, yeah, so you kind of mentioned a couple things there. I am curious, how have you made the changes for those slow months are not as slow, right? You mentioned messaging, a little bit of email marketing. What other things did you do or have you done to really improve sales during these slower times?
I think it's, obviously you can do stuff on social media, you can do stuff through email marketing, but I think a lot of, I talk about culture. A lot of culture depends on your coach's ability to interact and build relationships with the families and the athletes, right? So part of our internal meetings leading up to those months is like, hey, make sure we're communicating with these athletes. Like, hey, what are the plans in like during the season, right? We want to see you in season. Here's what training looks like in season. Here's why it's important. Here's when you can come in. And again, getting back to the whole salary component, like before, now we have like coaches, enough coaches on staff to serve athletes because the hours are a little bit different in season. They come in later. They need to come in the weekends. So it's really 7 days a week. In order to charge a membership, you need to have people available to serve the athletes. So I think it just becomes a matter of like, these are the conversations we're having. This is the messaging we're giving the athletes. This is why we're prioritizing it. Because I think it's like, if you're willing to come 3 days a week as an athlete and continually work for 6 months in the off season, clearly development is your priority for you. So what's 1 day a week coming in and training just so we can maintain all the stuff all those good physical attributes we've built in the last 6 months? Come in once a week, right? At least we're not falling off. We're not looking to gain. We're not looking to improve. It's just when you start back up in the off season, now we're not starting back at zero. We're essentially picking up where we left off. And now as an athlete, if you're looking to play college sports, now we're reaping the compounding effects of development year after year. Otherwise, you just, each year you're building up capacity and you're losing it every season. So
that's actually really interesting because I feel like I hear from some of the sports performance people, they'll try to make new programs for Gen Pop or not their target market during this off season to make up some of the money. But it sounds like what you're suggesting is, no, it's retention. I'm just taking my existing clients and explaining the value of staying when they would normally leave, right? And selling them on like a maintenance plan while they're in season rather than having to recreate some other thing for some other group of people to come in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the challenge, getting back to my previous statement, is that like, it's tough for us. Like, yes, we're slower. So it's tough for us to all of a sudden create a new offering for adults now. And then come September, when the gym gets really busy again, like
you got to kick them all out to make room for athletes.
Get rid of these.
Yeah. And look, I think that's partly why a lot of people, once they realize the high seasonality of training athletes, they're like, well, I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I'm just going to create something more sustainable. And like, look, that's always been in the back of my mind. But for me, like I believe in providing what I value. And for me, like I know I can provide the utmost value to athletes. So that's always been the plan. And the adult stuff is something that, look, I know we can do it, but at the end of the day, we are a sports performance training facility, and that's who we are. That's what we've built as far as our brand and our reputation. So for me to walk away from that after, 18 years, like it wouldn't be worth it. So we kind of utilize the adult fitness as a way, like, how can we provide good training supplemental to what we're doing on the sports performance side, and still, like, we want to create like the same level of quality from an adult fitness standpoint. It's just we have limitations because of the nature of our business. So
we talked about the seasonality aspect. We talked about how it's difficult trying to monetize the off seasons. Let's go back and how do you attract these athletes, and then what does it look like on ramping them? So talk us through that paid assessment and how you go about that into selling a small group membership or a semi-private membership.
A lot of it is, earlier years, it was a lot of personal referrals. Guerrilla marketing, like reaching out to coaches and say, hey, if you have any athletes, like high level athletes who are looking to make it to the next level, like send them our way. We'd be happy to work with them. And, then coaches would see the level of the athlete that they got in return, and they just started referring more. So, after 18 years of doing that and building a reputation, like we never really had to do much from like a paid advertisement or anything like that for the athletic population. Now it's, we do a mixture of referral campaigns. We'll do some reactivation stuff. We'll do, we're actually toying with the idea of this summer doing like a bring a teammate type of thing for a week, the first week of June. So we're definitely always looking to try other ways of bringing in new athletes, but our evergreen is, hey, you're interested. Most of the people who call us up, it's never a cold call. It's never like, they don't have to be sold there. It's more or less like, I want to train. How do we start? So our admin takes those calls. She does that sales conversation, and it's like, who's, and it's generally with the parents, and it's, tell me about your athlete, injury history, playing history. What are their goals? Great. Let's schedule an assessment. And from that standpoint, they come in, it's a 90-minute paid assessment. Depending upon who does it, it could be anywhere between like $200 to $250 for 90 minutes. But from that, the coach spends 90 minutes with the parent and the athlete. We get all the information from like a qualitative and quantitative standpoint. We do some objective and subjective testing. And then we do like a short workout. And then at the end, we kind of connect with the parent and the athlete and say, all right, great. Here's what we saw. Here's what we think is the best plan moving forward. Here's where we should start. And then the athlete is like, they train twice a week, 3 times a week. And then we execute the plan that we go over in the assessment. And so that's generally the process to get people to come into training. As far as our memberships go, it's like it goes month to month. You can cancel at any time. We've tried the 12-month commitment, the 3-month commitment. And from a billing standpoint, there was too much complexity. So we just made it as simple as possible. So that's typically how we structure the intake and evaluation of most of our athletes. And then it's conversations like, hey, we're coming up on in season. We just wanted to make sure you're doing a 2 days a week program. Let's transition you into an in season program. And that's we're having those conversations maybe 6 weeks out of that transitional standpoint. So, and that's how we've kind of really done a better job this year of transitioning people from off season to in season and retaining them throughout their in season months.
So you got this big behemoth gym now. You got a bunch of members. You got a process in place. You work with gyms. You obviously get people coming and asking you who are not 10, 15 years down the road like you are. If you were starting from scratch today, what would you build? If you're a gym owner who maybe has 50 to 100K to put into their first gym, what are you renting and how are you structuring the initial offer?
Yeah, I think for me, what always worked out for us is we've never gotten too far ahead of our capabilities, I guess you could say. We've slowly grown, we've slowly evolved from a revenue standpoint, from a space standpoint. There was never any point where I was struggling to cover rent or payroll or those types of things. And I think it just allowed you to focus on the main thing. And they say, make the main thing the main thing. And for us, it was always the training, right? I think too many people get into a fitness training business. They don't know anything about, they're not good coaches, right? For me, it's I've put tens of thousands of hours on the training floor. And that's what I built my business on. That's the level of service, especially when you're working with athletes. You have to deliver on what you say you're going to do. When you're speaking with parents, how you communicate, the way in which you communicate, being treating it with true professional level of integrity and process and purpose and all that stuff. That's something that I think people over time, they just realize when they come here, that's what they're going to get, right? It's unfortunately in a lot of other scenarios, people might be great coaches, but they don't know anything about running a business. And that's not to say when I opened my doors, I knew nothing about running a business, but I knew training and I knew how to treat people well. And I delivered on my promises. I think that's as simple as you can make it. And, from the standpoint of revenue and costs and all that, just don't bite off more than you can chew. And then be in a situation where you're not chasing a rent that's just never sustainable. So I think that's what's allowed us to continually grow and focus on the main thing. I've never taken on any debt to pay for facilities. That's just, I think for us in the sports performance world, the most important thing is space, right? I think in gyms, you can get really hung up on spending stupid money on machines and equipment and all that stuff. It adds up really, really fast. But from our needs, I kept it as minimal as possible. And I think just over time, I've reinforced the need for that, just based on the population that we work with. So,
and as John alluded to, now since you got this big gym, you make all this money. You've been around a while. You work with, I believe, Business for Unicorns, and you advise and help other gyms. So, when you are talking to gym owners who aren't starting from scratch, who are now in the middle of their journey, what do you see? What are the challenges you see them coming up against, and how do you help them through those?
Yeah, I would say, the obvious ones like how do we get more revenue? How do we bring more people in the door? And like those are, I think that's always going to be the challenge of every gym owner or business for that matter. It's like how do we get more qualified customers? I think where I provide a unique perspective is I was an owner operator. Like I wore every hat in the book. Like I did our books. I did all our payroll. I did all of our, like there's times where I cleaned the gym, like all the shit that had to be done, it was done by me. And so I think as my evolution went on, I quickly realized like that's not sustainable. Like the only way I can do that is have good people, keep good people, and gradually pull myself out. So I think the challenges that I've seen with a lot of people who are in a similar situation to where I was maybe 5 to 10 years ago is that, hey, I like my gym's doing well. I feel like I'm making good enough money, but I'm a slave to it. And I can empathize with that because that's where I was. And like, I was happy with the money I was making. I was making a difference with athletes and adult fitness alike. But I'd spend all day, every day. Like people always say, like they work a 9 to 5. Well, I worked a 5 to 9 every day, Monday through Friday, and then some days on the weekends. So for me, like the context I try to provide is like, what's the roadmap of getting you out of that without sacrificing income, without sacrificing like the quality of what's happening, again, because at the end of the day, like the training has to be the same, right? I built a reputation. People wanted to come in and train with me. Well, how do I pull myself out and still provide the same level of quality than before? And it just doesn't have to be for me. So I think it's a matter of really finding and developing good coaches, giving them opportunities to thrive, create autonomy within like their development. Like, hey, what is it that you want out of this? What's the career path you want? Right. Like at the end of the day, like when I started, like somebody believed in me and the capabilities I had. And so I was like, this is a tough business to make a career out of. So my job now is, yes, I still want to provide opportunities for my athletes, but how am I now providing opportunities for my coaches? And I'm doing that through, building autonomy, creating opportunities for them to elevate themselves within the company. And, I feel like I've always done a good job of retaining coaches for a good amount of time because I pay them well, right? Like I pay them in a way that like I pay them a salary, I give them benefits, I give them paid time off. Like that's not really common in sports performance, right? And I think that's something that like by doing that, I was able to create opportunities for them, which allowed me to pull myself out slowly over time. And I think that's the biggest problem is I don't want to say people are not aware of like some of the sacrifices and things that have to take place in order to do that. But there are some. And I think probably the most important thing, to be quite honest with you, is that the thing that kept me from doing that for so long was my ego. And I think in the strength and conditioning world, like we're alpha men, right? That's just the way it is. That's the way we're wired. Like we want people to come in our gym and think like, hey, there's
my training's the best. I know how to do it the best.
Absolutely. Like he's the man. Like I want to train with him. And it's like, that's like, honestly, that was a lot of what was driving me in my early years. And I don't think it's a bad thing because that level of ego and ambition is what allowed me to create what I've created. But then I quickly realized maybe 5 years ago that was limiting me. And so in order for me to retain the quality of life and be, now a present father and a present husband and not be a slave to the business, I had to be like, you know what? I'm okay with people walking in here and like them not seeing me as like the dude or the guy, but, and I'm okay with passing that baton to our performance director now, who does a freaking awesome job of, he's taken what I've built and he's now making it his own. And I'm helping to provide the resources and all the bandwidth and whatever I can do to help him grow. That's my job now. Right. So, and I think this spring, I think I coach less than 5 hours a week on the floor, if that. I'm home every night for dinner, or I'm coaching my kids in their respective sports. And like, to me, have I sacrificed a little bit from a financial standpoint? Yeah. But what matters to me most is having the freedom and the flexibility of, my business serves me both in my, financial standpoint, and it serves me in the person I want to be as a dad and as a husband and all those other roles. So I think really getting clear with what people want out of their business. And then it's like, how do we reverse engineer and structure that, provide, bring in personnel to help provide that level of freedom if that's what you want. And so I think those are some of the biggest challenges I've seen with people who are like, they just get stuck and they don't know how, they don't have a strategy of getting themselves out.
So maybe you can elaborate on that, because I do think finding talent and then finding the time to develop them to deliver the level of service and quality that you want is a bit of a sticking point, right? Because you're stuck doing everything. You're wearing all the hats, and you hire someone so they can relieve me of some of these things so I can focus on growing the gym. But I also need to spend time watching them and making sure that they're being developed. It's a struggle that the gym I'm going to right now, I love the training he provides, but he's like, yeah, I'm like, so what's the growth plan? Like, how are you going to get more bodies in here? I was like, well, I can't right now because I can't train a coach. I don't have time to train a coach. And so that, what did you say, John?
He's stuck, right? Like,
yeah, no, he's stuck. Yeah, he's stuck. And
the
so
paradox of growth.
What are your approaches and strategies to developing talent? Especially when you have such a specialized kind of focus on training. And then, how would you advise a gym owner like that who was stuck?
I think for me, in my experience personally, like the first step that had to happen was bringing in an admin. And so I think that was really important because that took the sales calls and the follow-ups and the scheduling, that took that off my plate. And so that was something that when we moved into our facility here in 2014, that was something that I took on. I brought in the admin, same person who's with us now. And so that was, I think, the first step. So the time I won back from hiring her is what I kind of devoted into, all right, I've identified this coach who has some potential. They're bought into our culture. They're good people, right? Like, I feel like they have the personality and characteristics of a leader. So now I'm going to take everything I know and build them up. And so that's, we have weekly, like, structured conversations, and it's, hey, on the fly on this, like maybe think of this in a certain way, being, respectable about it and how you're communicating with them on the floor. Like if there's stuff that you want to address, but for the most part is like having a dialogue on a regular basis of, hey, here's where you're at. Here's your development. Here's things I want you to improve on. Also providing like positive feedback when you feel like they're doing a really good job. And then it's just a matter of like giving them more autonomy, giving them more responsibility. And, as they start getting better, it's like, okay, now I see like you have the capability of taking on more roles and more responsibilities. And so I think it's a long process, right? Because I think that's where it takes time. Like, not only to just build up trust and to put somebody in that role. It takes time to build them up as like their quality as a coach. And so I think that's something that I identified. Damien is our like sports performance director. He's been with me since 2015, and he's somebody who, like, since day one, like, has done everything I've asked. And I started to realize like him as a true potential as being a leader is when like he would come to me with like, hey, I've noticed this has been a challenge, or this, we could do this better. It wasn't just training and all that stuff. Like when he started to come to me with more visionary type of questions and feedback and things like that, I'm like, that's great. Like now you're definitely somebody I see as somebody who could be a leader here. And so, giving them opportunity to elevate, taking on more roles. And then as he's done that, now I don't have to be like tied to the floor every day, right? If we had a high level athlete, I was the one that was always training them. Now it's like, I don't need to train him. I can if I want, but I don't have to, because I know he's going to do as good of a job, maybe better, because he has more bandwidth. And I'm, now shifting a lot of my focus on business development and other opportunities. And it's like, but that's also what he loves, right? That's what fills his cup up. So I'd be a fool not to really capitalize on that. So here, take all this. This is yours now. Let's build it up. I'm going to continue to support you as I always have. And let's create a runway for you to thrive and really build a career within our ecosystem. And so that's where, as we look at growth and opportunities and things like that. It's like, well, I'm looking into those things because it creates opportunities for our team and our coaches to pursue, higher level positions within our company. So I think that's, as long as you can identify that through your core group of coaches, and from the standpoint of like, all right, that's a person who could be a leader, just constantly working on them, building them up, and then getting to the point where like you got to let them go and do their thing, give them the bandwidth to make mistakes and coach them up on those mistakes. And and I think understanding like it's not going to be done exactly how I would do it, but maybe that's a good thing, right? Like I think we're always so stuck in the weeds every day that sometimes we can't get out of our own way. So sometimes having those other people who might have an unbiased, type of point of view, it's helpful. So I think that's how I would go about it, and really just understanding it's a long and slow process, and you might get lucky, and you might have to really you might be able to escalate a lot of those things because you just might find a rock star coach who just loves it and wants to be it, and it's so sometimes it doesn't take a ton of time, but in my specific case, it does. I think one of the biggest things, and we kind of touched on it earlier, is, we're in a very unique standpoint of where people can build a following as a coach, in quotations, but has never really spent time coaching, right? Like for perception standpoint, they can build an online following and look like, if they're fit themselves and all that stuff. And I think it becomes a challenge because it's like, how do you really differentiate the people who know what they're talking about versus the ones who don't? Like, for example, from my knowledge, part of the reason why I love BFU and learning from guys like Pete and Michael and Aldo and Mark is that like, I want to learn from people who've actually done it, right? Who've actually spent time building the shit that I'm trying to build. And so I think be very wary about like who you're learning from, right? Like have they themselves gone through the same stuff and done the same like things that you're trying to build? Like if they aren't, or they haven't, like, right? Like I would venture to say that like, it's probably like a lot of my things I teach are based off of my own experiences and the challenges I've gone through. So I think in like the fitness business landscape, I think that's something that's super valuable. And then the same could be said true as like from an athlete or somebody learning, like who wants to train, like learn from people who are actually doing it themselves, right? Like are the people drinking their own Kool-Aid, or like, are they doing the stuff that they say they're doing? Or is it like, are they imposters, right? I think that's the standpoint where it gets really tough nowadays, where people can position themselves as experts, but they really haven't spent much time. Like one of the things that I feel like differentiates me as a coach and my experience is like, I've taken athletes from high school, and they've like from a high school standpoint, all the way through their professional career. And I've seen that development, the evolution of like a young athlete to an old athlete to a retired athlete. And I think that's where like most coaches like say they understand that, but nobody understands how to treat those athletes until they've actually done it. So I think it's just, I guess you could say this about really anything, is that like, make sure if you're learning from anybody, make sure that they actually have executed on those things. They've gone through those things, rather than, they're talking on experience and not theory. Right. I think that's where things get a little bit challenging when it comes to just overall growth and seeking out knowledge in our field. So,
and then do what they say, right? Which I think is the other piece. We mentioned Pete and some of the other BFU guys. Pete, we were just speaking with him, and he said that you're very good at following the playbook. If someone who's walked the walk tells you to do something, you will say, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And then you just do it. And you also mentioned earlier, do the thing, right? And so, I guess how have you combated like shiny object syndrome, or when things are kind of popping up saying, hey, yeah, let's ditch this sports performance thing and just do Gen Pop because that'll be easier?
Yeah, it's a funny question, because it's something that like I've been actually like really contemplating over the last couple months. So for me, when I started the Annex in 2006, like where we are now is I had a very vivid, clear picture in my head of what I wanted, like the facility, like how I wanted it structured, the purpose, the why behind everything. Like it was very clear. And so it was easy for me to work tirelessly every day to get there. And so now essentially like I'm living that vision, right? And so now it's like, well, what's next, right? How do we continue to approach growth? It kind of gets back to our discussion of like, I could probably be more efficient with the space we take on. Maybe we don't need as much space. Is it, I think given the position I am in and the reputation we have, like we've had a lot of opportunities and we've pursued opportunities because we should have, and it was the right thing to do at the time, and they haven't worked out. Like there's a facility that came up that wanted us to open up shop in like one of those big sports domes, and they wanted training as part of their offering there. And so we did it, and it was right before COVID, and it fell flat. For the list of a lot of reasons. I think those were lower leverage situations. And we talked, I don't know if it was on or off air, is that like doing things that are going to avoid ruin, right? Like don't put yourself in a situation that if it doesn't go right, like it's going to tank everything. And so those were calculated risks. They didn't work out, but it was a risk that I was willing to take based off of, where we were in the evolution of our business. I think the value from those situations that I've learned from them, right? I've become a little bit more wary of like you said, Mateo, is like shiny objects. Is like it's now saying no more than I am saying yes. And so it's like, well, what does growth look like for us moving forward? I think for me, the way I answer that is like my core values are based off of really like two different people. Is like, how is it helping my athletes and how is it helping my team, right? If it can help those two individuals, then I'm going to look into how we can pursue those opportunities. But if it doesn't serve both of those people, then it's not really a viable option for us to continue to move forward. And so I think that's, if hopefully that answers your question. Like I don't have a black and white answer. And I think it's a something that's continually evolving in my head. I think in a perfect world, potentially opening up other facilities, that are just slightly outside of our geographical reach, that we can still pull on our reputation and our brand, but it's not going to, pull from our existing client base. And so, and in those facilities, I vision it's like a building similar to what we've done here and how we've done it, starting small, providing a proof of concept in that given market, creating an opportunity for a coach who's deserved it and stepped up and earned that opportunity, create some incentive for him or her, whoever it is. And then, as the model proves itself, then put more resources towards it. So I think that's kind of where my head's at. And I think from an operational drag standpoint, like we have the systems, we have the structure. A lot of what I'm doing now in my current day-to-day is that I'm trying to create systems so that if and when those opportunities come, it's just a matter of like deploying those systems that we've built here and just pressing play and giving the coach the playbooks to do it and the structure and the runway to do it. So, which is ultimately what I didn't have building the business. So
I think that's a good hop off point. I think that's the power. I think that's the power punch.
Boom. Done.
All right, Mickey, you've shared some knowledge. You've shared the playbook. If people want to learn more about you, where can they go to get more information?
Yeah, so most of our stuff is Instagram. So if you want to follow the Annex, it's just at Annex Sports, all one word, ANNEX. And then if you want to follow what I'm doing, most of it's been about my kids, but it's at Mick Bruckner, BRUECKNER. So
awesome, man. It's been a pleasure. We love exploring different models. And Gym World, if you enjoyed this, if you learned something, if you got a little nugget that you're going to take away from your gym, be sure to leave us a review, like the video, and if you leave us a little comment, maybe Mateo will answer. You never know. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But that is it. Until next week, Gym World, you're enough. And remember, Gym World loves you.